Welcome to the Sociable Dog Pod, the podcast for anyone who wants to know more about the extraordinary relationship we have with our dogs and why we don't always understand each other. We'll be digging into the roots of dog behaviour so we can get to know our best friends better and make our lives with them a little richer. We'll be busting some of those sticky myths about why they do what they do, exploring how they learn, and trying to interpret their language. We'll talk science, we'll share stories, have some laughs, and make some interesting discoveries all along the way. I'm Si Wooler, and I've been working with dogs and their humans for more than 15 years. So let's talk dogs. This edition of the Sociable Dog Pod is going to be looking at reactivity towards other dogs when on lead. Now, we've had quite a few inquiries about this subject, so I think it's worth breaking it down a little so that people can come to an understanding of what drives this particular behaviour and how you might start to deal with it.
We should probably start off by talking about what we mean by reactivity. It's growling, snarling, lunging on the lead, isn't it? Which is really difficult if you're at the human end of that. Walks ought to be about pleasure and they become a bit of an angst fest. The whole social aspect of going out for a walk with your dog is lost, and sometimes you can feel a bit judged by other dog walkers when you're out and about. But generally, it's not a result of anything the owner's done, is it?
No. And for the most part, reactivity looks pretty much like aggressive behaviour. In fact, I'm not entirely convinced there's much of a difference by definition, which is really difficult for people when they want other people to see their dogs in the same way they do, as animals they love and are loving generally towards them. Aggression or aggressive behaviour as a social stigma which is unhelpful when it comes to eliciting help or understanding from others out in the world. I mean, the common misconception is that either the dog is bad, and I'm doing air quotes there, or that they've been mistreated in some way to cause the behaviour. Now, while that can be true, it can be true that they've been mistreated. It's far from the only reason for a dog to be reactive. But the public perception can play a big part in the way that people cope. It can also mean that people hesitate to get help for themselves and their dog. They worry that the trainer's going to judge them in some way. And let's face it, some trainers out there do and will, but not all. And if you're confronted by judgment or accusation when you contact someone for help, you should put the phone down and find someone who's going to give you kudos for having sought help in the first place. Now, I want to stress here that the best thing you can do if you have a dog who is reactive to other dogs or people in any situation is to get some good quality professional advice and help. Hopefully, though, this episode will help grow some understanding of what's going on.
Okay, so we're definitely not going anywhere near the blame game on this one. But the fact is, lots of dogs are really pleased to meet other dogs or other people. So what's behind this behaviour?
Oh, we're definitely not going to blame the parents, no. Now, so there's two main reasons for dogs to be reactive or exhibit aggressive behaviour towards other dogs, or people for that matter, while on lead. And they are 1, frustration, and 2, fear. Now, if you're thinking that they sound like fear and frustration should be very different from one another, then you'd be right. They are indeed polar opposites as far as behaviour motivation goes. If the reactivity is because of frustration, the dog is actually likely to be pro-social rather than anti-social. They want to engage in some positive social stuff with the other dog or the person, but the lead gets in the way. So they get tetchy because they can't go and get on with meeting and playing.
Kind of like the equivalent of road rage, when people want to get where they want to get to as fast as they can and they can't, so they start leaning on the horn or winding down the window and shouting and calling out the odds.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Now, the object of the outburst hasn't done anything to deserve it, but if they decide to return fire, the whole thing can get out of hand in a heartbeat. With fear, the dog definitely doesn't want to go and meet. Oh, dear me, no. They want to make sure that the scary dog or person goes away. Now, fear, as I've said often to anyone who will listen, is a serious motivator of aggressive behaviour in dogs. It's notoriously easy to install and equally notoriously hard to uninstall. It's one of the relatively limited options a dog has of saying, "Go away, I'm frightened." And it works, because if we see a dog snarling, lunging and snapping, we're likely to turn tail and head in the other direction, right? Which is, well, understandable, isn't it? Unfortunately, at the human end of the lead, getting upset or even angry and telling your dog off for lunging and growling when they're really only telling the scary thing to go away is most probably the worst thing we can do.
That's quite a difficult idea to get your head around, though. There are probably a goodly number of people listening to this right now, shouting at wherever they get their podcast that growling and lunging is bad behaviour, it needs dealing with, so of course I'm going to tell my dog off. What else am I going to do? What do you mean it's not helpful?
I get that, honestly I do, but here's the thing. It isn't going to solve your problem. In fact, it might make it worse for you and will most certainly make things worse for your dog. It's one of those supremely ironic realities of life. The thing you need to keep right at the front of the brain when dealing with this stuff. Fear isn't a choice. If your dog's fear aggressive about anything, they haven't decided to be upset by that thing. They didn't wake up one morning and think, "I'm going to upset my human today by being frightened of dogs or people or plastic bottles or whatever it might be." No, they just are. They just are frightened. Fear is involuntary. If you're scared of spiders or screech if there's a mouse in the house...
You're looking at me now, aren't you? It was only a little squeak. Couldn't help myself. Wasn't expecting to see a mouse coming out from behind the washing machine.
Exactly. You aren't making a choice. So the really important thing to try and do, because we can't control our emotional response to scary things either, or it's difficult, is to stay calm, because it's the right and helpful thing to do. If you tell them off, you're likely to drive the problem kind of underground, make it bigger and make it harder to identify. It's also likely to lull you into a false sense of security.
Okay, so fearful dog, calm is order of the day, but let's back up a bit. You said there are two reasons for reactive behaviour. They look the same, but how do we tell which we're dealing with? Does it matter?
Yes, it very much matters, because we need to approach them in different ways. Fear is about wanting scary things to go further away and leave us alone. The behaviour we exhibit is designed to do that. It's about safety, a sense of mortal danger. Whether the danger's real or not doesn't really matter. Perception over reality. And in this case, it is perception that matters. But we'll come back to that. Let's get to frustration. Frustration, on the other hand, is a very different animal. Frustration is, as we've said, about the dog wanting to get closer to a very positive encounter, but they can't because the lead stops them from doing that in the way they would like to. The same can be true for doors or fences, gates, windows, walls, etc., etc., etc. What's even more problematic is that with frustrated dogs, if they reach the object of their desire but they've already built up a head of frustrated steam, they often behave aggressively despite the fact that they wanted to approach. I know, right? You'd think they'd want to make it easy for us, wouldn't you? So, we've got growl, lunge, snark, meaning go away. I'm frightened of you and I would like you to go away. And we've got exactly the same, at least as we perceive it, growl, lunge, snark, that means let me go and see that dog or person. This is taking too long. I'm getting annoyed now. Oh, for goodness sake, and you can beep off too. Charming, right?
This is getting really hard. So we've got fear and we've got frustration. They look exactly the same. But if you call it wrong or make the wrong move, you could get yourself into all kinds of trouble. What on earth is anyone supposed to do, apart from walk in the dead of night and hope no one else is around?
Well, let's not get too gloomy. There is some good news. We can establish which it is without putting anybody at risk, and there are going to be solutions. Now, how straightforward that will be to resolve is going to vary dog to dog. Fear may not resolve entirely, but you will always make at least some progress. Frustration is a much easier fix, for want of a better word. That's because with fear, you're dealing with spontaneous emotional responses. And with frustration, the dog has an ability to make choices. But you're right about being able to tell them apart is going to matter if there's any hope of putting the right strategy in place to resolve the issue. How do we identify the cause?
Tell the people we're all getting frustrated now.
I saw what you did there. The first thing to consider is, what do we already know about the dog? Their history, their track record, in other words, their rap sheet. For example, do we have a play history? Has your little whirling dervish got any playmates, and does he or she make friends easily? Off lead, that is. You see, that's telling info. I know what you're going to ask. You're going to ask, why is that telling info? Well, I'll get to that in a second. I promise. The other thing you might have information on is how hard they bite, if and when they do. That's not something I would suggest you go out with the specific intention of testing. But if you've been unfortunate to witness them using those gnashes on another dog, what was the outcome? Injured prides only, or worse? That's going to tell us if we need to use precautions before we bring dogs together, like muzzles, for example. If you don't have that information, and you don't know if your dog has a play history, then a muzzle, properly trained for, is going to be an important consideration. Right, back to play history. If they have a play history, or if they meet other dogs perfectly well when they're off lead, then there's a really good chance that you're looking at frustration on lead and not fear. If you don't have that history, for example, with a rescue dog, you can test for it. You get the dog in the mix with a seasoned player with the unknown quantity wearing a muzzle, under professional supervision, and probably on a long line, and you see if they play. Or you do on-lead tests to see how they approach other dogs if the consequence of them kicking off is to be taken further away each time. Again, I would do this under supervision of a good trainer because timing is really important. But here's what basically happens. You start walking towards a target dog. Your dog goes off like a banshee. You immediately turn and go in the opposite direction for 15 or 20 yards. You turn your dog back again. They go off. You turn, and so on. After half a dozen turns, or maybe more, the kickoffs start to reduce in energy, and the perpetrator may even moderate their pace a little. If this happens, then you can reasonably start to conclude that the motivation for the behaviour is frustration. Why? Well, because if the perpetrator actually wants to see the other dog, the turn and go acts as a punishment or a fine. He learns that the cause of going further away is his rude behaviour, and he puts some effort into changing it. If the root cause of the behaviour is fear, however, it won't improve and will likely worsen. Why? Because he wants the scary thing to go away, or for you to take him away. The kickoff is spontaneous at first, but he soon learns that it works. You move him away. And so he repeats it the next time, even sooner and even bigger, because it gets distance between him and the scary thing.
Okay, that all sounds pretty simple in theory, but it can be quite tricky to get right. The natural human instinct, if you know that your dog always kicks off at black Labradors or men in baseball hats or people in high vis, is if you see one of them approaching in the distance, you tighten the lead, you pull your dog towards you, just so you feel a bit more in control. But actually, that's not a great thing to do, is it?
Yeah, it isn't helpful, but it is understandable, especially if your dog weighs 45 kilograms and you haven't got a tractor to tie them to. But no, it isn't helpful, and it's likely to make the outcome more inevitable because it's a ritual, right? You tightening the lead and looking around for escape routes and calling the emergency services ahead of time is predictive. Your dog learns that your ritual predicts the arrival of a problem, and they start to anticipate it, and not in a good way.
Okay, the other temptation is the moment you see someone or another dog approaching that is likely to get your dog to kick off, you start digging in your pocket for a treat. so that you can keep their attention and distract them. But if the reactivity is about fear rather than frustration, and your dog's been happily sniffing and mooching about and hasn't seen the scary thing approaching, then getting the treats out too soon isn't very helpful either, is it? It's not a smart approach. Distraction isn't a solution here, is it?
No, distraction isn't really a training strategy. It can be a management strategy, but that isn't going to solve the issue, and you have to accept that it's going to set you back a little. Not all the way by any means, but a little. Look, let me explain. In the same way that tightening the lead in preparation for crisis tips your dog off, so too can treats if they're offered before the dog is aware of the problem. Right? The order of events matters if you're going to make positive associations between scary things and treats. The dog must see the scary thing first so that it predicts the food and not the other way around. If it is consistently the wrong way around, the food predicts the scary thing, and the scary thing has no positive predictive value at all. Worse, the food may predict the scary thing, and so your dog may become sensitized to the offering of food. Ouch. But let's go back to distractions. Distractions are fine if the situation's crept up on you and they help you get out of dodge. But personally, if I'm trying to train a dog to feel better about a scary thing, I want them aware of the scary thing and making the connection between it and the yummy stuff. If you're having to distract them, you're either moving too fast or you're simply too close for too long, which means you need to go back a few steps and slow the plan the heck down.
The other thing that's worth trying to do if you're in a tricky situation and you want to get your dog out of it quite quickly is basically abandoning any sense of social embarrassment and learning to do really silly happy talk. Now, I have witnessed you happy talking some really big, feisty client dogs out of tricky situations, and you get really silly and really squeaky. It is a wonder to behold. Obviously, I just keep my head down and pretend I don't know you. But seriously, it is a good approach, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. Embrace your silly side, baby. Most dogs like their humans being silly.
Okay, there comes a point whether the reactivity is about fear or about frustration. When you've been following the plan, you're making some progress, it's looking good, and you've got to the point where you've just got to screw up your courage and let your dog meet another one, face to face, nose to nose. How do you do that? Because that is really a tense situation.
Yeah, I know that this is rapidly becoming my default answer this week, but the best advice I can give is to do it with the guidance of a professional. It doesn't need to be in person. These things can be done very successfully remotely, but definitely get some experienced, cool-headed help. That said, here are some hot tips if you are the one that's going to be making that first introduction. Stay calm. I know it's easier said than done, but it's going to help. Preferably find a friend with a pro-social dog to help you. You can do this in a way that I quaintly refer to as seek and destroy, i.e. you're finding locations where there are reliable other dogs on lead, but where you can move quickly on if you need to. But if you don't feel any social pressure, you're gonna find this easier. When you get your pooch up to their new acquaintance, keep the lead loose. It's harder than it sounds, so work hard at it. Try to keep 90 degrees from the action so that the lead and you stay out of the mix. You'll get out of trouble just as quickly if you keep the lead loose as you will if there's tension in it, and you won't face the risk of frustration creeping in, or exploding in for that matter.
Just a last thought. I said pretty much at the beginning that if you've got a reactive dog, you tend to feel that you're under the beady eye of judgment from other dog walkers. But that isn't actually always the case, is it? Sometimes people ignore all of the body language, all of the signals you're giving out, and they let their dogs approach either on a long line or off lead and just say a cheery, they'll sort it out between themselves. It's all right. My dog's really friendly. that can be a bit of a nightmare if you're trying to work with a reactive dog, can't it?
Yeah. There used to be an unspoken convention among dog walkers that if you saw someone with a dog on a lead, you'd put your dog on the lead too until you found out what the situation was. And that's a really helpful convention because however friendly the off-lead dog, it's a tough ask for anyone trying to train a reactive dog when they're not in control of the approaches.
Okay, so there we are. Dog reactivity and what's behind it. It's either fear or it's frustration, and you have to find out. With me, it's definitely about lack of coffee. If you encounter me with Ripley first thing in the morning, I would suggest it's best not to approach. I should probably have one of those high-vis jackets with need space on the back. But probably shouldn't be facetious. For anyone who's working with a reactive dog, it isn't a joke, and you have our absolute respect. If you don't have a reactive dog, but you see someone or encounter someone regularly who's in that situation, give them a break, give them some space, and let them do what they need to do.
Because while it doesn't absolutely take a village to solve the problem, the support and sensitivity of the local dog-loving community can really help.
Okay, cool. Call to action there. What are you talking about next week?
So, next week, we're going to be talking about establishing safe bases or secure bases for your dog. So making you a secure base for your dog.
Now, we have had a question from Lily Cockapoo. And the question is not for us. It's for Ripley the Cockapoo. Lily wants to know how she can outwit her humans. Now, Ripley has said she can't quite come to the microphone just now, but she has given us a few top tips to pass on. Tip number 1, look cute. I think you've probably got that one covered, Lily. Tip number 2, play dumb. If you act like a complete airhead, under all circumstances, you'll be able to blag your humans out of way more treats for doing the simplest, easiest behaviour. Tip number 3, never admit you've had a meal. If you're given your dinner, eat it up, clean the bowl, and then resume that sweet little expression of hopeful anticipation that you had before it was served. Do this regularly, and if you do, one day, may not be today, may not be tomorrow, but one day your distracted human will feed you twice. Result.
If you have any subjects that you would like us to cover on the Sociable Dog podcast, let us know either in the comments or on our X Twitter account or by email to simon@sociabledog.com. See you next time.